The impeachment of South Korea's president is upheld. The Constitutional Court's decision against Park Geun-hye has provoked celebrations and violent protests. So what now for regional stability, especially during increasing tension with North Korea? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Sika. 4 years ago, she was elected the first female president of South Korea. Now she is its first democratically elected leader to be removed from office. The Constitutional Court has upheld the impeachment of Park Geun-hye over a corruption scandal that could now see her face criminal charges. Her downfall has capped months of turmoil in South Korea that saw hundreds of thousands of people take to the streets in weekly protests calling for her to step down. The accusations of influence peddling and cronyism have shaken the top echelons of business and government in the country. An election to replace Park must now be held within 60 days. The acting Chief Justice announced the court's unanimous decision to uphold Parliament's vote to impeach Park.
결국 피청구인의 위헌 위법 행위는
The claimee Park Geun-hye's unconstitutionality and unlawful acts betrayed our citizens' trust in the president. They should be perceived as unacceptable, serious violations of the law from the perspective of the Constitution's protection. In this respect, we are announcing a ruling with the unanimous opinions of justices. We dismiss the claimee, President Park Geun-hye.
Harry Fawcett has more on this from Seoul.
Well, for 19 Saturday nights, people came to this very square in the middle of Seoul to protest and to demand the end of Park Geun-hye's presidency. This Friday night, they've come out to celebrate just that. Her presidency is conclusively over after the verdict in the Constitutional Court earlier on Friday. But a number of things still do remain unresolved. Perhaps most unexpectedly, the fact that she is still in the Blue House, about a kilometre away from that stage. She remains in her presidential office, her aide apparently saying that security arrangements had yet to be made to see her return to her family home. But once she does, already now in fact, her presidential immunity is stripped. There is the real prospect of a criminal prosecution against this now former president. On top of that, we have a fresh presidential election within 60 days from now. At the moment, the Liberal candidate, Moon Jae-in, the leading Liberal candidate, is the prohibitive favorite. If there is a Liberal presidency at a time of a much more conservative American administration, at a time when North Korea is continuing to expand its missile program, its nuclear program, at a time of bad relations between China and South Korea, how will that factor in? Those are questions perhaps though for a later date. Right now, people are celebrating that they've got what they wanted, the end of the presidency of Park Geun-hye.
So how did we get to this stage? Well, it emerged last October that President Park allowed a close friend, Choi Soon-sil, to interfere in state affairs by editing the leader's speeches. The first candlelit protest was soon held and continued every Saturday. The biggest crowd of South Koreans ever seen, more than 2 million, demanded Park's resignation. At the end of October, her friend Choi was arrested. State prosecutors charged her with abuse of power and attempted fraud. Parliament voted to impeach President Park in December. The boss of the giant company Samsung was linked to the political scandal last month. J.Y. Lee was in court Thursday to deny fraud and embezzlement along with 4 other executives. On Monday, a special prosecutor concluded that Park conspired with Choi to take bribes from Samsung, and that has paved the way for the prosecution of Park. Well, let's bring in our guests now to talk more about this. From Seoul, we have Bong Youngshik. He is a director of the Foreign Policy Studies program at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. From Exeter in the UK, Aidan Foster-Carter, an honorary senior research fellow in sociology and modern Korea at the University of Leeds. And lastly, from Seoul, Andrei Lankov, a professor of Korean studies at Kookmin University. Good to have you all with us. Now, Bong Youngshik, it's difficult to overstate just how huge this decision is and the implications for South Korean politics.
But the impeachment decision rendered by the Constitutional Court means that South Korean liberal democracy has been matured. Now the principle that nobody is above the Constitution has been confirmed by the ruling. And the executive branch of the government, which used to be the only government in action, is no longer free from the checks and balance by other branches of the government, such as National Assembly and the court.
So what do you think this says about the institutions of government then in South Korea? Is it, I mean, regardless of what you think of this particular decision, is it reassuring that to see that these institutions are strong and that there's been a largely peaceful transition of power?
Definitely, I would expect a peaceful transition of power. We're going to have the election to elect new president within 60 days, and the May 9th is considered to be the day of the presidential election. And if you just see how the demonstrations or the mass gatherings are formed in the street of Seoul right after the impeachment decision was upheld by the Constitutional Court, it is very orderly and peaceful compared to the mass demonstration that brought down the military authoritarian leadership since the 1980s. So it shows that maturity and the capability of South Korean citizens and the institutions to take care of the business in favor of peaceful transition of power.
Aidan Foster Carter, this is quite a dramatic fall, isn't it, for a woman who was the daughter of a former revered leader in the country, elected on a wave of popularity back in 2012. I mean, help us understand that. How do we make sense of that?
It is very striking. I mean, at the personal level, it's obviously a tragedy for Park Geun-hye, and yet it's not over yet, as has been suggested. I mean, criminal charges will almost certainly be pressed, of bribery and so on, and she could end up behind bars. One recent poll suggested that almost 80% of South Koreans would like to see that result. It's strange. She wouldn't be the first politician, though, in terms of trying to take a broader picture. She appealed. Her appeal was always elusive, but it was great. She somehow, although a conservative, she's very much her father's daughter, she managed to somehow, in her heyday, make the Conservative Party seem more liberal. She pushed it to the centre ground, policy-wise, in terms of welfare, and she won. I mean, it wasn't an overwhelming majority, but she won by 1 million votes 4 years ago. But then in office, I mean, even before this scandal broke, quite honestly, in my view at least, she proved rather empty. We didn't really know where she stood on domestic policy, slogan succeeded slogan, creative this, economic democracy that, and on North Korea, which I'm sure we'll get to in a moment. She veered from a trust politic to a very hard line. So it wasn't clear that she was achieving much, and she only had 5 years. South Korea only gives presidents a 5-year term. She was due to leave in less than a year anyway, but what a very ignominious way to go.
Andrei Lankov, we mentioned at the top there the Samsung connection, one of a number of very large conglomerates in South Korea known as the chaebols, and the very kind of cozy relationship that they've often enjoyed with South Korean governments. It's clear that many South Koreans are fed up with that and the corruption that it has brought on. How much has that to do with Park Geun-hye's fall, you think?
I think that because all this story began to unfold in October, sooner or later, involvement of some big businesses was bound to become known. Maybe I'm a bit cynical, but frankly, I strongly suspect that Park Geun-hye has not done much more than most of previous presidents of South Korea. But because it were outraged about Choi Soon-sil, her friend, who was allowed to have, I would say, far excessive influence on the execution and planning of the domestic and international policy. So people were outraged, investigation began to advance, and we ended up with these corruption charges. Even though, once again, probably she has not done anything which would be exceptional by the earlier South Korean standards.
Well, let's broaden this out then a little bit and talk about possible successors now. A presidential election to replace Park is being planned in May. Some of the possible candidates include the acting president, Hwang Kyo-ahn. He may resign and seek the job permanently. He was prime minister when Park was president. Then there is Moon Jae-in, who is the former head of the Democratic Party, and he is top of the latest opinion polls. And then provincial governor An Hee-jung is also popular. So, Bong Youngshik, if I could turn back to you on this, who is the leading candidate at the moment? And let's say, for the sake of argument, it is the leader of the Liberals. What sort of change do they offer then?
Well, for now, the forerunner in the upcoming presidential election should be Mr. Moon Jae-in, who represents the legacy of the ex-president Roh Moo-hyun and representing the opposition party in this struggle against the Park Geun-hye's political scandals. But at the same time, the conservative parties do not really have a strong candidates to match the popularity of Mr. Moon Jae-in and the popularity of the governor An Hee-jung. So because the two top candidates are all from the opposition party, people's attention has been focused on the primary elections of the Democratic Party, which is a big blow to the conservative parties. So that brings the Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-ahn, who is now currently acting president, as the only default competitive candidate to represent the conservative faction in domestic politics. But the problem is that Mr. Hwang has been closely tied to Park Geun-hye administration because he served not only prime minister but also as attorney general. So how to sever the image, how to reduce the image that he has been kind of a favored, government official during the Park Geun-hye administration will be the great, obstacle for Mr. Hwang before he will ever decide to declare his candidacy.
Aidan Foster Carter, a number of political watchers in South Korea have basically been saying that this election is the Liberals to lose, that they have a real opportunity here now to get back into government. If that's the case, what sort of changes, if any, are we likely to see in the way this relationship that I was talking about between the governments and these large corporations?
Good question. I agree with you entirely that the election is the Liberals to lose, provided they can unite around a single candidate. That is a big if in South Korea. Twice before in the 30-year history of South Korean democracy, we've seen one side or the other, left or right, divide into two candidates, and they have a first-past-the-post system, as we do in the UK, no transferable vote, so it is quite possible to throw away an election. However, Moon Jae-in's lead is so great, I don't think that will happen. On the chaebol front, well, I'm a bit of a skeptic, because I've been following Korean politics for some decades, and the chaebol question has been there all the time. They're too big, they're too powerful, yet they're essential to exports. What are we going to do about it? President Park Geun-hye promised economic democracy, but we heard very little about it once she was in power. Moon Jae-in, who leans rather more to the left, could well be more serious about it, but their chaebol do remain indispensable, and although besmirched by the allegations, yet of course to be proven in court against Samsung and others, and certainly past scandals too, and although everyone loves to hate the chaebol in South Korea, nonetheless they remain vital for exports, and exports remain vital for the economy. So I'm a bit of a skeptic. I don't think much will change, quite honestly, in that regard, except, hopefully, no corruption, but they will still remain very, very powerful in the economy, probably more powerful than is a good thing.
Andrei Lankov, what do you see as the dominant campaign issues in this election then?
Corruption and domestic policy, I would say. To somewhat smaller extent, relations with the United States and anti-missile defense system, but it's less important. However, I cannot help but to agree with Aidan Foster Carter. He basically said what I would say. No matter what the candidates are talking about, most likely any significant reform of chaebol is pretty much impossible. We should keep in mind that Moon Jae-in began his political advancement as the chief secretary to President Roh Moo-hyun, another liberal candidate, the liberal president who was running the country from 2000 to 2008. And President Hyun also was pretty much serious. He did look serious about chaebol reforms, but basically we can say that he achieved almost nothing. So yes, now there are talks about economic corruption, about doing something about excessively large businesses, but I would not expect it to happen.
All right, well, let's broaden this out now, talk about what implications this has for the region as a whole now. South Korea's acting president says he will be monitoring North Korea's reaction to the developments in his country.
Social disorder due to the impeachment is concerning in this situation. Exploiting this, the North could further aggravate division in public opinion and worsen our confusion by staging military provocations. The military should be fully prepared to restrain the North's provocations and to firmly punish them when they provoke.
So the acting president there saying we need to continue to show strength in the face of North Korea's action. So I want to ask you, Bong Youngshik, if we see a change of government in the next 2 months, are we likely to see a liberal government that's going to attempt to engage with North Korea more? And what does that mean for the other players in the region, such as China and Japan?
I guess the answer to your question depends how you define engaging North Korea. There are many forms and different levels of engagement with North Korea, and it is up to the new president to decide what would be the optimal manners in which the inter-Korean relations should be, conducted on a new plate. But North Korean government has been extremely critical of the former President Park Geun-hye because former President Park has been, attacking the so-called supreme authority of the Kim Jong-un leadership, and decided to close the Kaesong industrial complex, and just kept on, pressuring, a North Korean regime on the premise that North Korea's days were numbered. So in the meantime, I believe that North Korean leadership will just cautiously watch how the election, will be played out, and what kind of a new leadership will be placed in South Korea. Then devise its own, roadmap or strategy to deal with South Korea under the new leadership. For China, it has committed to putting pressure on South Korea for its decision to introduce the U.S. THAAD system. So we will be seeing quite chilled bilateral relations between Beijing and Seoul, on not only on security front but also economic front for a while.
Yeah, let's talk about this THAAD missile system. Come to Aidan Foster Carter on this. This is the missile defense system that South Korea is getting from the United States to defend itself against an attack from North Korea. But obviously the Chinese are not happy about that as well. Do you think that this administration will be trying very hard to get that in as quickly as possible before the next election?
Well, that's exactly what's happening at the moment, because Moon Jae-in, the person that we seem to agree is the front runner, left of centre, as of now the likeliest next ROK president in barely 2 months' time. In the past, he had called for the decision on THAAD to be left to the next administration, i.e. him, quite probably. He's since sort of finessed his views a bit on that and become a bit more slippery. I don't necessarily mean that as a criticism, because meanwhile the fag end, and in its dying embers, the Park administration and the acting president, who is a Park man and just as conservative, are trying to get the thing there. And, the first components of this system have arrived at Asan Air Base south of Seoul already. So the idea is to have THAAD deployed as a fait accompli. So one of the very first challenges for the next president, whoever it is, of course, shouldn't assume anything, along with the ever-present North Korea, which we'll no doubt get to, is the Chinese what to do about China. I must say that I hope whoever is in charge will take a robust line. China is being a bully. China is being very unsubtle. China is breaching WTO rules by interfering in trade and the bilateral free trade agreement the two countries have signed. And whoever is in charge ought to take, there's about 20 different cases now that are clear-cut, even though China denies them. And really, if the rule of law is to be upheld in commerce, just as it has been constitutionally, then they should be taken before the World Trade Organization. Bullies should not be, regardless of the rights and wrongs, and I rather wish THAAD hadn't been deployed as it happens, bullies should not be allowed to get away with it, and China is the bully. They claim to be sanctioning North Korea, but it's much more obvious that they're sanctioning South Korea, and they shouldn't do that.
All right, let's put that point then to Andrei Lankov. I mean, everything we're seeing in South Korea now is happening at a time of very delicate relationships in the region. Do you think China is kind of it's kind of showing off its weight around too much?
Well, good question. What is too much? Because Chinese worries about South deployment. They don't want to create a precedent. They don't want American anti-missile defense system to be positioned near the Chinese borders. So they are determined to push and, if you like, even punish South Korea as hard as humanly possible. Even if they don't succeed, probably they hope to use South Korea as a sort of subject lesson for everybody who would dare to do something similar in future. So relations between China and South Korea are going to be very tough. Of course, there is a probability that Moon Jae-in administration, assuming we are going to have such administration, will make some kind of compromise or will agree not to deploy the THAAD anti-missile defense system. However, given the popularity of the idea with the South Korean public, I believe it's not very likely to happen. And if THAAD is deployed, it almost guarantees a very tough, very hostile, if you like, relations with China for, well, maybe a couple of years, maybe longer.
Bong Youngshik, what advice would you give to the next president of South Korea, whoever it is?
Well, rather than giving advice, I'd like to highlight one point based upon Professor Lankov's remark that North Korean military threat is far more than just nuclear weapons and missiles. What about the chemical weapons that was demonstrated very lethal in case of the assassination of the leader's half-brother, Mr. Kim Jong-nam in Malaysia, which seems to be, by all estimates, 100 times more powerful than the sarin gas that was used in the tragic terrorist attack in Tokyo subway many years ago by a religious sect. So, and the THAAD system can only provide the defense within the 200-kilometer range. So, the capital city Seoul and the large part of the South Korean territory are outside the purview of the deterrence and defense that will be provided by THAAD system. So even with perfectly smoothly operating THAAD system, South Korea's national security will remain quite vulnerable to North Korea, equipped it not only with nuclear weapons, but also artillery, cyber attack capability, chemical weapons, and fifth largest standing army. So you see the broad context of national security and inter-Korean relations under the new administration.
All right, just in the minute that we've got left, I'll give the final word to you then, Aidan Foster Carter. What do you see as the kind of best case scenario here?
Goodness me, I don't really see a best case scenario at the moment. I'm an optimist by nature, but I'm a bit pessimistic. In almost half a century of following North Korean affairs, I've never seen quite so many unknowns. But the best case would be if Moon Jae-in somehow manages to revive the Sunshine Policy, which many think is discredited. I mean, it's not really easy to do it when the threat from the nuclear and missile threat, and now, as mentioned rightly, the chemical threat is so great. But nonetheless, I think we've seen that a hard line of only sticks simply hasn't brought North Korea to heel. And I think the challenge is to find some combination of stick and carrot. I mean, you can't just go giving freebies to a nasty regime like this. There's got to be conditions. But some way to bring them in from the rather dangerous brink that I worry we're heading towards.
And on that, we're going to have to leave it. Thank you to Bong, Youngshik, Aidan Foster-Carter, and Andrei Lankov. Thanks very much for being on Inside Story. And as always, thank you for watching. Remember, you can see this program anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Hazem, Sika, and the whole team here, bye for now.